I'm going to talk about a painting that gets left out of the story of America's founding because it tells the truth, and the truth is awful. But also, like a lot of you right now, I'm burnt out and depressed, and I don't really feel like being on camera, so I'm gonna get off camera. This one's for you, Dad. Happy birthday. Washington crossing the Delaware, this is the most important piece of art about the birth of the nation. This painting is cursed. This artist's rendering of America's founders puking and passed out drunk is called Sea Captains Carousing in Suriname. Painted around 1757 by John Greenwood. No, not that John Greenwood. That John Greenwood. The scene depicts a group of high-profile slave-owning New Englanders who would all go on to be Revolutionary War heroes and politicians. They're having a debaucherous party in Paramaribo, the capital city of Suriname, a Dutch settlement that was illegal for British colonies to trade with at the time, but as we all know, nothing has ever really been illegal for rich white guys. In 1977, historian Robert Kennedy attempted to identify everyone in the painting, and that's what I'll mostly be going by for this video. We're not positive that everyone has been identified to a T, but we have it on good authority. The painting was commissioned by future Navy Commander Essex Hopkins. He's there in the center of the table. Also by future Rhode Island Governor Joseph Wanton, over there on the right, passed out and wigless. Their at the time current governor, Essex brother Stephen Hopkins, who signed the Declaration of Independence, pours a bowl of rum punch on Joseph Wanton's head while patting the head of their other brother, William Hopkins, who is also passed out and wigless. Rhode Island state legislator and maritime judge Ambrose Page vomits into Wanton's coat pocket and onto his fallen hat. Page is so faded he can't tell his ass is being lit on fire by a candle. Page's father-in-law, the one who treats dogs better than black people, is Daniel Jenks. He was the one in charge of making sure no illegal cargo left Rhode Island, and then he and the boys left Rhode Island to unload some illegal cargo. They sold horses and came back with goods and slaves after about a 10-week stay. This painting would remain in the Jenks family for generations before it was sold to the St. Louis Art Museum in 1948. Daniel's son, John Jenks, is holding a candle towards the artist himself, John Greenwood. No, not that John Greenwood, who has portrayed himself vomiting in the doorway. There are also some other slave owners like Nicholas Cook, Nicholas Power, and Godfrey Malbone, the latter two of which are seen dancing in the midst of this hell on earth. There are some unidentified Dutch merchants as well, and most intriguingly 4 slaves, 2 serving drinks, and 2 crammed into the corner, trying to rest among the broken pipes, bowls, chairs, liquor bottles, and playing cards on the ground. These slaves are literally and figuratively marginalized, to the point that Greenwood painted their figures smaller than the white men, making them appear unnaturally undersized. They're almost naked apart from their loincloths, a concocted uniform by the Dutch used to make them appear more savage as a means of justifying their captivity. Usually in paintings of upper-class slave owners, the slaves are depicted in the finest valet attire. They want to display their prized possession as a living symbol of their affluence. Here's $1 bill guy George Washington posing with his slave William Lee, who wears a fancy red turban. Sea Captains Carousing in Suriname is also a display of wealth and power, but because it was a private joke painting made to be shared amongst friends, it's probably the most honest piece of art this era would ever produce about what the fuck was really going on with the elites at the time. By 1750, there were like 40,000 African slaves in Suriname and something like 2,000 white people. They worked these people till they dropped dead. The average life expectancy for a slave on arrival in Suriname was 6 years. So, while over 124,000 slaves were brought there between 1730 and 1780, after decades of exhaustion, disease, brutality, and torture, by 1780, only around 50,000 people had survived. Their descendants make up most of the population of Suriname today, one of the smallest populations of any country in the world with just about 633,000 people. There's a first-hand account from Dutch soldier John Gabriel Stedman about his time fighting the slave revolts in Suriname. There are illustrations about the atrocities the slaves there endured by William Blake, but be warned, it is very hard to look at. Those slaves are the ones incurring the real cost of celebrations like Sea Captains Carousing in Suriname, and most of them paid with their lives. Sea Captains Carousing in Suriname was inspired by the work of William Hogarth, whose paintings also depicted the opulence of the era. It's specifically based on a painting Hogarth ironically titled A Modern Midnight Conversation, which is also a bunch of affluent drunks surrounded by empty bottles pouring alcohol over each other. But just in a general sense, I totally see it. Black slaves serving lazy white people, drunken revelry, crazed slurping from punch bowls. Getting so caught up in your own bullshit you don't notice there's a fire going on. The yuppies networking, the panic, the vomit, and yes, that Johnny Greenwood. But most of Hogarth's paintings like this were meant as condemnations of English high society's depravity. Sea Captains Carousing in Suriname is a celebration of depravity. When I see it, I'm reminded of Hieronymus Bosch's hellscapes, because everywhere I look, something fucked up is happening. There are people being tortured, and there are demons. Like Shakespeare said in Tempest, hell is empty, and all the devils are here. Sea Captains might be a painting of one night or a pastiche of multiple nights involving each of these men at different times, but what's clear is the vibe. This is an ode to the boys' club, wallowing in their own vileness with pride. Even the guys from The Hangover deleted the photos after they looked at them. These men wanted their crapulence immortalized. The founding fathers are always given this godlike reverence, especially in artistic depictions, but this is who they really were. This is what they thought was funny and cool. This is what America's elite wish to preserve. I can see George Bush in this picture. I can see Dick Cheney in this picture. I can see Jeff Bezos in this picture. I can see Joe Biden in this picture, and I don't like it. Sea Captains Carousing in Suriname is a glimpse of truth through all the pomp and circumstance. It may be an appalling truth, but in a sort of gross way, it can feel liberating and cathartic when people tell on themselves like this. The Jefferson Memorial is a fantasy, but the work of convincing others that it's a fantasy is extremely exhausting and ultimately unsatisfying. By design, because the overt bigotry of the past walked so that the covert bigotry of today could run. I've heard fellow black people and other minorities talk about preferring overt bigotry to covert bigotry because you know where you stand with overt bigotry. Nowadays, most bigots, especially in the West, understand that racist beliefs are unpalatable and that being willfully obtuse is the key to furthering their racist agendas. Gina Yashere and Trevor Noah both have stand-up routines about this, and they're an interesting contrast because Yashere is English and she sees American racism as more overt.
When I was in Hollywood, this was an actual audition I got sent for. I'm not even making this up. Ghetto Hoochie number 3. In the UK, we walk into the first class carriage. This white woman, she shouts, this is first class. And then all she could think of was like, I thought you were lost. How'd you get lost on a moving train going in one direction, bitch? How?
Trevor Noah is South African, so he sees American racism as more covert.
In South Africa, the government would just say, blacks cannot live in these areas. I don't like it, but I don't live here. You get what I'm saying? But then in America, you'd be like, can I get a home loan? And they'd be like, no. And you'd be like, why? And they'd be like,
But either way, the covert bigotry drives us slowly insane because we gotta make a long-ass video every time we want to prove that racism exists. Sometimes we don't even catch on ourselves until someone has already hoodwinked and bamboozled us. And this wasn't just a matter of times changing either. This was the evolution of Southern strategy, a conspiracy compliments of the Republican Party of the United States of America implemented to court white Southern voters to their party, because of course it was. And just like sea captains, they eventually told on themselves. This is political strategist and amateur blues guitarist Lee Atwater. He became a part of the same boys club as the Sea Captains just a couple of centuries later when he ran campaigns for both Reagan and Bush Sr. Total sociopath. Put hot sauce on his ice cream. Always had an entourage with him, even in his home life. And like me, he was an avid fan of professional wrestling. Said it was the only honest sport. Basically turned politics into pro wrestling. He was the dirtiest player in the game. The kind of guy who always has the ear of the king. He was Littlefinger. He was Starscream. He was a white Stephen Warren from Django Unchained. He'd do anything to win a campaign. He took cheap shots at opponents' mental illness.
I said that he had been hooked up to jumper cables in reference to a bout he had had with mental illness in college, which had been made public 2 years before, so I wasn't breaking any new ground.
Ran anti-Semitic campaigns against Jewish candidates. He fabricated stories in polls when he couldn't find anything juicy. He was a master of scare tactics, and stoking voters' fears of black people was regularly his tactic of choice. He also used to play guitar for Percy Sledge and released an album with B.B. King. I guess he loved the blues so much he wanted to make sure black people would have something to be sad about for the foreseeable future. Lee Atwater's most infamous quote wasn't even revealed to be him until 8 years after he was already dead. In an anonymous interview for Alexander Lemie's 1981 book, The Two-Party South, he gave up the whole game.
Yeah, now y'all aren't quoting me on this. All right, I won't hear it. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. If it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
What he's describing is what's known today as the dog whistle. Things that sound like a harmless invitation to one set of ears, but like a menacing threat to another, often darker-skinned set of ears. The, quote, coded language that replaced the racial epithets of Lee Atwater's mentor, Strom Thurmond.
Enough troops in the army to force their southern people to break down segregation and admit the niggers into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches.
Just a reminder, Strom Thurmond had a secret black daughter named Essie Mae Williams while fighting for segregation. If anyone ever tries to tell you that the U.S. party switch never happened, just ask them who Strom Thurmond was. Joe Biden read this guy's eulogy. We are truly lost as a species. But like Atwater said, the end goal was that race issues got put on the back burner, and hey, look, that's where we still are. Slavery, segregation, they didn't really go away, they just went covert along with the rest of racism. Unless a cop or somebody unalives one of us on camera, there is little national interest or effort in undoing the long-term damage of the sea captains. The most telling thing Atwater said there was also the first thing he said. Don't quote me on this. It's an anonymous interview, but he's still so terrified of the truth getting out there. Just like how Sea Captains Carousing in Suriname was a privately commissioned painting to be shared amongst friends, never intended to be seen by the public, Atwater did not want the truth to be traced back to him because he understood how damning it was. His whole grift was doing shameful, underhanded things and then denying them up and down. It's as easy as saying men are created equal and then owning certain men as property. Politicians are commonly compared to snakes, and they are slick, and they are sneaky, and they do wait till you least expect it to bite you in the ass, immobilizing you and swallowing everything whole. But snakes are predators, politicians are scavengers. The song The Snake, famously performed by Al Wilson, but written by civil rights activist Oscar Brown, and much to the dismay of Brown's surviving family, famously reappropriated by Boys Club lifer and garter snake Donald Trump, The Snake tells the tale of a kind-hearted woman who saves a snake from freezing to death. At the end of the song, the snake bites her, and when the woman reacts with surprise, the snake simply reminds her that she knew he was a snake the entire time.
Now you knew darn well I was a snake before you brought me in.
Politicians rarely do this. When they get caught, they don't admit who they are, they just regroup and keep the illusion going as best they can. When you press them, they shrivel away like a worm in sunlight because that's what they really are. Western politics is a culture of spineless worms, dining on democracy's carcass for as long as they can, so long as they can feast under the cover of darkness. They know if the light catches them, they're fried, and they have evolved to avoid it at all costs, but they still really want that carcass. And since the implementation of the strategies Atwater was talking about, the voters he and the rest of the GOP sought to gain through these worm-like tactics have adopted them for themselves in everyday use. This is how the infamous brain worms got into these people's brains. Even ardent white supremacists have mostly dropped the shaved heads and tattoos, pursuing a more professional look in order to, hide their power level or whatever. Denying racism is the default now. You can even straight up call someone the N-word and never have to cop to being racist. You can just say that's not what's in your heart or something, and you're good to go. It's always going to be treated as something that's just in the offended party's head, up to and including when police unalive us on camera. They can even get convicted. Trump's snake-like acts of overt bigotry like the Muslim ban and responding to that question about white privilege by telling Bob Woodward that he drank the Kool-Aid. The ones bozos like him for. They're always going to be followed by a weak denial if pressed. Conservatives still deny any and all racism because they've been trained to worm out of everything. They're in too deep in that carcass to admit they benefit from racism now, even if it is on tape. Atwater repented before he died at age 40 of a brain tumor and seemed to regret many of his choices towards the end, although even the sincerity of that is dubious. Reportedly, when they found his Bible, it had never been removed from the shrink wrap. Regardless, the damage was already done. Covert bigotry reigned supreme, and all we have are these occasional glimpses of explicit, incontrovertible evidence of the true nature of an inherently racist political system. When people say they prefer overt racism to covert racism, it always makes me sad because it's all racism. It's all horrible and dehumanizing and humiliating, and we're so resigned to its existence that we're now bargaining for preferable versions of racism. But when I see sea captains carousing or listen to that Lee Atwater quote, I completely understand it. As minorities, we at times have to wonder what gets said behind our backs, but we know that mystery is somewhat eternal. Black people are still over-policed, underpaid, living 10 years less than the average white person, and undoing that is not a goal for any of those worms out there. I am 35 years old and have never been paid a livable wage in my entire life, despite having done high-quality work for high-profile companies. I have never been made a full-time employee. This, too, makes me wonder what is said about me behind closed doors. I've mostly worked for white liberals who can obfuscate even more convincingly than conservatives because they have a built-in cover story for their racism. I'm going to keep making videos and try to get myself out of survival mode, but unfortunately, these are still the people who will ultimately decide my worthiness. And from a lot of experiences I've had, my hopes are not high, but I am still hoping. I went to one of the best art schools in the country with an extensive art history program for first-year students, and I never saw this painting there. I found out about this painting in a 7th grade public art school class. The teacher snuck it into his slides to see if the students were still paying attention, and of course I was, and this image has haunted me ever since. Even though this should be in our history textbooks, it's this nasty little thing they want to keep under the rug, and things that get swept under the rug are my specialty. So when I see sea captains carousing in Suriname or I hear that Lee Atwater soundbite, it's like someone turning the gaslight off and telling me I'm not crazy, just for a second. If you would like to help me preserve my sanity, donate to my Patreon. I have free very low tiers. Every cent helps. I want to thank all my current patrons. You are my world right now. You can also send me a donation on one of the money apps. I haven't had steady access to mental health services in 2 years, and getting back into therapy is a big goal for me. I can't afford the gym right now either. That would help my brain too. I love bringing attention to this stuff, but some of it does take a toll on me mentally. I am willing to move pretty much anywhere, and I'll add my LinkedIn to the description. I'm not sure if that'll do anything, but I gotta be the squeaky wheel right now. I'm trying to build something grassroots. I know my worth. I definitely have something that no one else has. Try and find any other videos about this painting online. I'll wait. Same for a bunch of the other stuff I've covered already. I'm trying to prove my value with each of these videos. All it takes is one to get me over the fence, so if it's not this one, let's hope it's the next one. And I want to wish another happy birthday to my dad. He's been amazing my whole life, and he's a big part of why I'm like this now. I love you, Dad. And as always, if you have any suggestions for episodes or improvements or things you'd like me to cover here,